this video, I'm going to go over how you can use structured data with Copilot Studio, and I'm going to use Excel as an example of structured data that you can see how I'm going to use this and apply it inside of Copilot Studio. So the first thing you might be asking yourself is, what is structured data? What do you mean by that term? And think of it that you can have data like a Word document or something like that, where it's just a document and you might want to search over it and find different pieces of information, but it's stored in paragraphs and things like that. Where structured data is more stored in like rows and columns. And a lot of people think about this as like SQL databases or SharePoint list or Excel files as an example, because you can see the data structured in a row of data with columns that define the data. And so that allows you to have a structure to the data that you're consuming. So if I use an example of one of the Excel spreadsheets that I'm going to be using for this particular video that has information about Apple products, for example, and information about them, you'll see here the structure of the data is that I have a product name, a category, release date, display size, processor, RAM options, storage options. Each of these different things are stored in different parts of the data, and that's the structure. But you'll notice that the rows give you the information within it. So this is the idea of a structured data and an example of what we're going to use today. Let's start with what are some of the easy ways that a lot of people look after it, because they look at Excel and they say, oh, it's just a file. So what I could do is I could go to Knowledge and I could go in and I could upload a file like I've done here. So you can see here I've uploaded things about Surface product information, and you can see that it's uploaded as a file. But another common thing that we run into is that someone wants to put something in SharePoint. And you can see here I've got this one implementation that is a SharePoint document library with Samsung product information. So let's look at the SharePoint side of it really quick just so that we can see that. And you'll see here that what I've done is I created a SharePoint document library here, or I'm sorry, a SharePoint document library with just this one Excel file inside of it that's called Samsung product info.xls. And if we open it up, you can actually see that it's exactly the same thing that we had in the Apple one that I showed earlier in the video, but it's just over Samsung products. So let's go back and take a look here inside of SharePoint and notice that one of the things that we also had inside of SharePoint is we went ahead and I created inside the sales and marketing site, I have documents in here. And one of the things that you can see is that I actually have the Apple product information stored in a specific file, Excel file, inside of a document library inside of SharePoint. So now if you think about this, we've got three different types of configurations here. We've got an Excel file uploaded directly into Copilot Studio. So let's just go back to Copilot Studio and see this again. So here's a file uploaded to Dataverse directly in by just simply going in, hit add knowledge and do file. We also have a document library that contains Samsung product information. And by doing that, if we click into this, you'll see that this is just pointing to that particular location for SharePoint. And all the authentication is all set up for me, so I'm good to go. And then we have one last way that we're going to go after, and that was, remember we had that one file that was stored in a document library that was specifically around Apple's product information, and that's the table that I showed before, data, which we could do by creating an action. And in this, what I'm doing is I use an action that's wrapping a connector that's actually going to that SharePoint location to be able to go get the product information. Now, each of these are going to have their own benefits and disadvantages and things of that nature. So we want to take a look at them across the board. Some of it's around complexity. Some of it's around flexibility of conversation and search. But again, let's take a look at these different ways of going about this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by going back and let's do some demos here of different approaches. So we'll start with what I believe is probably the easiest way, that we could go after this, which is that you have a file that's already inside of a SharePoint document library, and you don't do anything with it, you just point to that document library. So in this case, what we're going to see is we're going to talk about this one right here, the Samsung product information. Now, the negative with this is going to be that right now as it stands, you'll realize that search and indexing is going to become a very important thing as we continue to move forward. In the case of where Copilot Studio is today, this is just a lexical search inside of SharePoint that's happening. And when you do that, you don't get the vectors, you don't get chunking, you don't get any of that today. Now, in the M365 Copilot, it does that today, and you will see that there is a distinct difference in the quality of what will come back and what won't come back. So now, needless to say, there's work efforts to work on making this better, but I just want to kind of show you the difference between this today, how it works. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to ask what are the specs of a Galaxy S23 Ultra, and I want you to pay attention to what's happening here as we go. We're going to see it go out and ask the question. And again, it's going to search for this Samsung product information inside of our typical generative answers path. But notice that it did answer this question. But if you notice right here, this bottom part right here is where it says AI generated content may be incorrect. What that means is that it actually did this. If we go all the way back to the overview page, you see that this is turned on and enabled. It means that the search didn't provide back enough information for it to feel confident in the answer from the SharePoint search. Or it could be that we didn't even get a response from the SharePoint search. Now let's ask a few more questions just to see if this is a trend that we continue. And you say, what are the specs of a Samsung Book 2 Pro? Now, I'll go ahead and tell you that all of these pieces of information are actually in that Excel file. So it should be able to answer these questions with this. But again, we're getting the information coming from the AI generated content may be incorrect. So it's all coming from the model. And then what if we just made it a really simple query that maybe is not device specific so that we could get it to just answer a question at all? And what you're going to see is that if I just say something like show me information on Samsung products, because it does understand that that's what's in that document library, because we're not specific to that exact file. We're saying this whole document library is for Samsung information. Let's see what we get back. And again, we did not use that Excel file. Now, if we notice, I just want to call out that you can even see here that I've nudged this to say that's what's inside of this thing, right? So again, in theory, we expected it to respond to this. And this is where a lot of people come back and they go, wait a minute, I really don't like that. Now, had we done this with unstructured data, you're going to find that lexical searches do great in that type of space. Maybe not as good as vectorized search, but still it does a good enough job that we probably could have gotten these answers if it wasn't in a structured data file inside a SharePoint. So now let's shift a bit and let's take a look if we did the same sort of kind of concept. I'm just going to clear the conversation history here. And let's go back to our overview page. And imagine now what we want to do is let's explore the next option. And this next option is going to be where we take the Excel file with the Surface product information and we've uploaded this to Dataverse. So all we did was go add knowledge and files. And when we click files, you drag and drop the file in and it uploads that file. And when the status shows as ready, that means that the file is actually indexed now. Now, what's the benefit of this inside of Copilot Studio? Well, when you upload it to Dataverse, the file actually gets a vector search and you get a lot more capabilities by having it vectorized. And we also get chunking of the data as well. And if you don't know what chunking is, just think of it that it breaks it up into just the digestible chunks that are needed to be sent back. So in other words, if this Excel file was huge, I don't need to necessarily return back everything. I can just return back the pieces of it that are relevant for this particular query that I'm asking. So now let's take a look at what happens when we upload it this way. So now I'm going to ask a bunch of different questions with it, and you're going to see a distinct difference in the quality of the response. Now, we haven't changed models here, guys. Everything's the same. The only thing we've done is change the way that it's indexed and searched based upon where we stored it. So now that we've done this and I asked this question, notice that we get the information back and you can see that it's answering the question that we got from the file. It did not go back with low confidence and go to the actual model. Now the other thing is, sure, I can ask follow-up questions as well, and you're going to see that that works just the same, and we get this back. I can ask and switch context about the product that I'm talking about and be able to go in and answer that question as well. And then I can also come in and handle things like, when was it released? Now, keep in mind that there are some challenges that we run into when we're doing this with structured data. Now, this is extremely flexible and it does a lot of really cool stuff, but let's look at where maybe it doesn't do such a good job. So I'm going to open up the Excel file and let's take a look at it together. Okay, so now we're looking at the Excel file inside of this whole Surface product catalog that I have here. And you can see that all of this information is really good. And just notice that the top up here, that the structure of the data works pretty well. But notice that as we get further along, I actually used an acronym over here. And what I meant by that was security chip, right? Some people call it a security chip. Someone might refer to it as a TPM chip or something of that nature. And notice that I'm using X's in here to basically determine yes or no if it has it. In this case, if I've got an X there, it's supposed to mean yes, that's a good thing. Some people will put a Y and an N. Some people will put check marks. It really doesn't matter. The point is that in this case, the data itself is not really fully understood when it's being looked at. So let's look at what the impact of that is whenever we try to hit this data this way. So now I'm back over at Copilot Studio and I'm going to ask a question about this TPM chip. And I'm going to ask specifically, does a Surface Pro 9 have a TPM chip? Now, because the data doesn't really have structure that's explained, what's going to happen is it's going to come back and it's going to say, it does not come with a TPM chip. Well, that's exactly opposite of what I really expected it to say. It should say that it does. And if you notice, it even references the document, making it sound like, yeah, it really knew the answer, but the answer's not right. So let's take a look at another aspect of where we might have a bit of a problem. If I want to come to this and I want to say something like this, what if I just said, I want to look up the specs of a Microsoft Surface product? Well, we know that this is the place to go look it up, but what you're going to see is it's going to come back and it's going to say something kind of weird, like this isn't really what I expected it to do, right? It says, yeah, I can do that, and it's telling me about a file, but that's really not very helpful if you really think about it. So let's go and look at this completely different. So imagine, if you would, that we want to attack this slightly differently. And in this case, I'm going to show you an example of how we hit the data, a different set of data. So now let's talk about the getting the Apple product information. Now keep in mind that this particular Excel file was stored inside of a SharePoint library. So it's inside of a SharePoint library so that the Copilot can actually, or the agent rather, can actually go out and get a hold of this file and hit this file with a connector. Now there are two different ones. There's one for OneDrive and there's one for business. In this case, because it's stored in a SharePoint location, I'm using the business connector to do this. So let's go in and take a look at what I actually did as part of this. So the first thing I want to do is I want to look at what I was able to do whenever I created this. And if you're not familiar with creating actions, I've got tons of videos on the channel for you to go figure out how to create an action. So this video won't go into that in detail 100%. But just to give you some perspective, what I did is I gave it a name of Get Apple Product Info. Same thing on the display name. And then you'll notice I gave a description of what this thing actually does. Now I've got it enabled at the top level. And in this case, I'm just saying use the Copilot Authors Authentication. This is just so you guys don't have to see it go out and ask me for authentication. But could we enforce the user's authentication? Absolutely, we could do that. Now, if I go to inputs, what you'll find is that you have to define the input for this. And in the case of this, I want to hard code this to the value of the location of the file. So I'm saying this is the actual SharePoint location. If you are putting this in when you first do it, I know this looks like just a bunch of garbly mess right here, but just know that when you don't have anything in here, you can actually click and choose what is the location where you want. This is just the identifier for the actual document library. Promise you, when you do the input itself, it translates this for you, so don't worry. In this case, it would say, I think, documents. And then I had to put in the actual file name in that document library because that's the file I want to use. Then within the file, there are different tables. And in this case, the table is called Table 1. And I've said that the primary identifier column, and what this means is what do I want to search over as the primary key in my data. And in this case, I said product name. Now, that just means that the column of product name is going to be the thing that is the primary key. It's the primary thing I'm looking for the search. Then this is going to say, okay, what's the actual value that I'm looking for the row? And in the case of this, you'll see here that I gave it a description, they explained it, and I left this as dynamic to put this in. Now, you can come in and you can add additional settings, you can do data validation, you can do all of those things. But for this video, what I mainly wanted to do is to make sure that you can see that basically what I'm looking to be able to do, and let's go take a look at this file. Basically what I'm saying to do in this thing is to open up this Excel spreadsheet, and I want product name to be the thing I'm searching for, and I'm looking for this. So this way I can come in and I can ask a question about any product that I'm looking for, and it will get me return the whole row of data. So in this case, it will go in, it will search for that and use product name. Now the last part is going to be the output. And the output, I've checked the box to say return response and dynamically do it. And then as I go down, you'll see that response is there's just a general response. But you'll see that if you scroll all the way to the bottom, normally you'll have like an add here. And what I did is I added every single column that included things from battery life to category. And notice this one. This is the key one that I want you to see. So there's a column called column 1. And I said, that's a TPM chip. And then that's what I wanted the TPM chip to come from. I didn't even give it an acronym or anything. I just let it be called column 1 to make it as less descriptive as humanly possible. And then you'll see here that I gave it an explanation around what is inside that data. So if you notice each of these things I'm describing in natural language, what kind of data is inside of it. And you can see that I've done this for every single one of the rows, or every single one of the columns for the row. Output mode, I've just selected all, and then I went ahead and saved this. And now because of that, what we end up with is this action that is specific to the Apple product information, and I've got this thing turned on. Now, just so you know, in order to make this work, you have to go into settings in generative AI, and you have to turn on the setting for the preview of the large language model being used as part of the planner so that it will go and grab this and make the actions work at the top end. So with that, let's see what the results are on this. So now, remember before I asked a question about just the general specs. I just want to look up the specs of a product, like the Surface product. In this case, I'm going to ask that same sort of question, but about an Apple product. And notice what the difference is whenever it comes back. It's going to come back and it's going to say, what is the name of the Apple product you want to look up? And so then I can provide the information on the Apple product I want to look up. And what you're going to find is that it's going to return back the information from that API call with all the information for that particular Apple product. Now, the thing that's interesting about this is that had I just went straight through and asked a specific thing about it, it would have gotten me more details. It would have gotten me a lot more information on this as such. Like, in other words, if I said, what are the specs of a iPhone 15 Pro, it would have understood that that's an Apple product and it would have went to the right place, but then it would have filled in the information on the iPhone 15 Pro and went straight to it. So you wouldn't have to ask this question. And just to show you that, just to give you perspective that this is actually more in depth, I'm going to show you by just doing this, where I'm going to ask it a question, and I'm going to ask a question, how much does the iPhone 15 Pro weigh? And notice that what it's going to do is it's going to fill in the information. And here, let's even turn this on so that you can see as we go further. You'll see that it went and it grabbed the information about the weight of the iPhone, and it got the information and answered that question from the actual Excel data. So now it didn't give me all this additional information because it didn't need to, because of the content of what I said. Just like if I ask a follow-up question of what is the processor, you'll see here on this side, because we've turned this on now, you'll see that it goes in and it looks at this and it says, oh, okay, hold on, this is the whole plan. He's talking about the iPhone 15 Pro, so it filled that in, and here's the information I need. So it answers the question with the relevant information. Now, if I actually want to, I can even swap. I can go over and ask about the MacBook Air M2, and it will answer the question about the MacBook Air M2. And as you can see, it got the answer to the question. It says it's a laptop. Now, needless to say, you'll see down here that it grabbed the MacBook Air M2, it pulled this information in and answered the question. Now, you see here that I've got the response to the TPM chip. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to ask it, does it have a TPM chip? And when I ask it this, because I've explained the structure of the data and I've explained what these things mean, it's going to come back and it's going to answer the question correctly. And you're going to see, yes, it actually does have a TPM chip. The reason it can do this is it can do it because it understands the structure of the data, not just the data itself or just the column names itself. This is where you're really using the power of a large language model to explain not only the data, but also the structure of the data. And so this is why it's a really important thing for people to understand the difference between how they are going about going after their particular files that are stored in structured formats, because there may be benefits in going different paths whenever you're playing with these. So I hope this video was super helpful. If you like videos like this, please like and subscribe to my channel for more. And as always, you can try Copilot Studio at aka.ms/try Copilot Studio.